Thanks so much. This presentation will be something completely different because it's not highly technical, but I'll be talking about a world of publishing that has so far been resistant to XML, or SGML for that matter of fact. So I hope that you find this interesting, and I'll be talking about how finally, after all of these years, SGML's 30th birthday, I think, will be celebrated at a birthday party at the Belisage XML conference in Washington, D.C. This August. And after 30 years, this sector of publishing has managed to not implement XML very widely. I'm hoping that now that may change, but we shall see. So my name is Dianne Kennedy. I'm with an organization called ID Alliance. If you've been with SGML and XML a long time, as I have, you may have known my organization previously as an organization called GCA, the Graphic Communications Association. I've been working with SGML and XML for 37 years. In the automotive industry, I chaired an activity called J2008, which was for automotive service information. At that time, developed both a database design and an SGML tag set. Participated in DoD CALs, and I see that their DoD CALs tables are still a topic of conversation. Some of those table models were actually developed as part of the GCA Winter Workshops and Tech Doc. I also participated in ATA 100. Currently, I'm working, GCA's name changed in around 2000, 2001 to ID Alliance. I'm currently the editor of a number of specifications for ID Alliance. Today I'll be talking about Prism, but I also am the editor of something called Mail XML, which is the underlying web services and XML schemas for all of postal distribution in the US with USPS, and also editor of a new specification called Print Quality Exchange. It's for exchanging print quality between automated on-press systems that register quality in terms of color, registration, defects, and so forth. And it's a communication protocol that's destined to move into become an ISO spec later this fall. So ID Alliance, if you've not heard of us, was founded in 1966, and it was to apply computer technology in the print media world. At that time, the internet was maybe a gleam in someone's eye, but certainly far away from the world of print and publishing where that all took place. Today, we are a global community of over 3,000 individuals and organizations around the world, and we have a focus on media and content. So we start with the creation, the production, publishing, distribution. Our membership includes all of the service providers, technology companies, everything from Adobe and Microsoft and MarkLogic, who is on our board of directors, and some of you mentioned MarkLogic products here. They all belong to ID Alliance. Our mission is to bring the media, content, and technology communities together to collaborate, to advance standards, to define best practices, and we do a lot of training and certification of products and professionals in the media production environment. Today I'll be talking to you about the two worlds of publishing. Most of you, as I was before I came to work full-time for ID Alliance back in 2003, work in the world of publishing that is content-based. But there's a whole nother world, and that's the world of publishing that's based on design. And I'll be talking about that world, their resistance to HTML and XML, the idea of us using metadata and a metadata specification that I edit called Prism, and then the idea of finally the world of magazine and design-based publishing beginning to embrace XML for authoring. So in the mid-1980s, when computer technology began to be applied to the world of publishing, the world of publishing really split into two very different worlds. And most of you are probably in the world where there's a focus on content. Our papers, for example, were encoded in a very standard kind of article encoding docbook for this conference and for many conferences. That docbook focuses on the content of books and articles. But there's this whole other world that focuses on design. Content-based publishing, as you know, communicating the content is the goal of that kind of publishing. We quickly adapt to standardized document structures, standardized styling that's programmatically applied through XSLT, for example. And that world is conference proceedings and scholarly articles, technical publication, legal publication, where this kind of standardized document structures and the focus on content is basically about communicating the content, not about the design. But there's a whole other world out there that is what I call design-based publishing. And that's where magazine media really falls. There are some other kinds of design-based publishing. For example, marketing and advertising. That's not much about the content, as it's much more about the design. And then there's a world of display books. In the US, we call those coffee table books, where the design is really critically important. And in fact, every page might be crafted in a way using design templates that really are quite different than the world of content-based publishing, tech pubs, and scholarly publishing. In this design-based world, it turns out that publishing is really often still in control of the art director. When you have art directors in control, it means that those kinds of publications really don't want to standardize the content. If you pick up magazines today, especially magazines that are high fashion magazines, for example, what you'll find is that there is no standard article structure, and that an article in one section of a magazine might look very different from an article in another part of the magazine. There are some standard nomenclatures for what makes up an article, but there is no standard structure, and there is no reliable order of elements and so forth within the magazine. When the world split into two, the design-based publications adopted computer technologies that are totally different from the computer technologies that were adopted in the world of content-based publishing. In design-based publishing, they moved towards the desktop publishing, where we could have very elaborate designs for each and every article in the magazine, versus content-based publishing, where we used tools in the old days such as Frame Maker and In Context and those kind of tools, which basically let authors create content in a structured environment. The worlds were split back in the 80s, and they've never come back together since. And it's very hard for people coming from a content-based world to understand the resistance and the differences for those publishers that are in the design-based world. I know notional structures are very, very different. Content-based publishing uses standardized document structures. In the design world, however, where we have gone is not standardizing our document structures, but actually standardizing metadata about the articles. That's the place that we could move. So in the design-based world, we do have content. We have text, and that's things like articles, blogs, maybe some of the text that's in these coffee table design-based books. We also have images and now video, audio, rich media, animation. But in our world, it's the metadata, the digital labels for each one of these pieces of content that's really critical. And so in the design-based world, the IT infrastructure has been focused on standardizing metadata for this different kind of content. Through metadata, we've been able to identify content, to describe the content, to manage our content, to pull the content together to create publications. And now what's becoming really important for us is this idea of using our metadata so that we can distribute content in new ways. The specifications in the design-based publishing world go back to about 1997, 1998. When XML was being developed and moving into the W3C community, there was another specification or recommendation from W3C RDF, and that was all about the metadata. And that's where these design-based publishers focused. And they began in 1999 developing some specifications for magazine content. And those specifications are called PRISM, Publishing Requirements for Industry Standard Metadata. PRISM version 1.0 was published in 2001. In fact, it was right after our 9/11 attacks. And it was, I think, at a Siebold Publishing Conference in San Francisco when the first version of PRISM was released. So what is PRISM? PRISM was developed, why? It was developed by this design-based publishing community as a way to monetize their content and their media assets. They could see that they couldn't standardize their document structures, but if they focus on metadata and describing these structures, they could enjoy some of the efficiencies and automation that they needed to have to survive. That activity began in 1999 and it continues today. It started in the Graphic Communications Association, and as our name changed in the early 2000s, it is now part of ID Alliance. We have technical working groups, and there is a ongoing working group called the PRISM Working Group. Over those years, more than 200 individual experts from over 90 organizations have contributed to the body of specifications that we call PRISM. And what we've done is develop modular taxonomies and control vocabularies that address ever-increasing content and media requirements for this design-based magazine media community. There are three profiles that PRISM may be expressed as, XML, RDF, and XMP, which is used a lot in these graphical workflows to embed the metadata right directly into the media asset. I should say that PRISM, as we develop metadata taxonomies and controlled vocabularies, we always look to see what exists. So we build, for example, in the early days on Dublin Core. We also collaborate greatly with a group called IPTC. Those are the news organization people, so that we share many of the same metadata fields with IPTC for images and now for videos. So PRISM is built on Dublin Core. We use namespaces to delineate the separate metadata vocabularies, and you see some of them here. Prism is particularly for magazine media. We use DC or Dublin Core or DC terms for general publication metadata. We have developed metadata sets for things that publishers need to manage content for. So for example, advertising, recipes are huge in the magazine media world, and we have a full metadata set for recipes. Crafts like knitting and embroidery are really big in magazine media, and there's metadata sets for each of those. Right now we're working on licensing terms so that as our magazine media content is distributed mobilely, we can provide metadata fields for the mobile distributors to say, when can you publish this? When is our embargo date? When does it expire? And also, where can you publish this? We have a whole full set of control vocabularies. I think there's over 80 control vocabularies that are published as a starting point for anyone to use. Things like a dish type for a recipe, a contract status if you're using Prism metadata to manage licenses and contracts. We've had some experiments with using XML for articles. Our first one was a use case in 2004, and this one was that the publishers needed a standard way to distribute the text of their article content to distributors such as a LexisNexis, a ProQuest, those people that were doing text-based content databases. At that time, we developed a schema that had Prism metadata in a header of an article, and the text was encoded with XHTML. And we had not only the XHTML tags, but we had both a DTD and a schema at the time. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. So this is the PAM message, and basically it is a message. It's made up of one or more articles that the publisher could send to the distributor, and it uses XHTML and many of the Prism fields. This is just another little piece of code that shows the kinds of metadata that you might have for the article. So the article might have a DC title, but for Prism it would have an alternate title. Sometimes the alternate title prints in a table of contents, but it's not the real title of the article. A teaser is common in magazine media. It's like a little line that encourages you to read the article. We use Dublin Core fields for creators, but we have our own fields for product codes, publication names, and so forth. The body content was tagged using HTML tags, but we added a class attribute because XHTML could be extended so that we could have byline, dateline, deck, lead-in, pull quote, box, sidebar. These are all structures, elements of design that are really text content that magazine media people recognize. But it's important to remember that all of this was done post-publication. So the workflow was that we published our print, and then immediately we sent the text either for keyboarding or for some kind of conversion into XML. And so the workflow looked like content creating, editing, production for the print issue, and then we sent, when it went to the printer, we sent the PDFs off to someone to convert it into XML for us. It's kind of important to understand that that was the workflow, and that publishers in the magazine media world, their only investment in XML was after the fact because it became a good archive or distribution platform. In 2010, there was an event that really had a huge impact on magazine media, and that was the launch of the iPad. It was a challenge because all the publishers that publish magazines in print could see that there was a digital future and they wanted to be there. But the problem was that they had all these desktop publishing tools to create print. They had no tools to go to a tablet sort of environment. They had only 90 days lead time between when the publishers got the iPad and when the launch was, and they wanted their magazines on there. They had no increase in staffing and no way to automate the process. For Idealines, this was a call to action, and we worked together with our publishers to try and define what the future for magazines would look like. And our working group was called NextPub. Our goal was to look forward, not just to bring magazine issues onto tablets, but forward to the world where mobile was going to be important, and that we were going to begin to deliver our content outside of our regular issue-based media channel. And the strategists that worked on NextPub could see that we were going to, in the future, have digital channels that were not based on the magazine, but probably based on subject matter and eventually individualized for the individual reader or consumer. At that time, this was between 2010 and 2012, we developed another XML schema called the Prism Source Vocabulary. The Prism Source Vocabulary, we had the tagline, the source is the solution, and we really tried to sell this concept to the magazine publishers that you really need to take a step back and start creating source in some sort of XML with your metadata. The foundations were Prism 3.0, which had a lot more vocabulary than our original Prism had, and our original Prism aggregator message, with HTML5 encoding, with a recommendation to use the semantics like article, section, those sorts of things that are in HTML5 already. And that was Prism Source Vocabulary. It was published in 2012, I believe. But this push towards XML-first made very little progress. The reason why was because publishers of magazine media are stuck in this page layout, I call it desktop publishing, it's much more sophisticated than that, environment. And so what they did for the various tablet editions were what we call print replicas. Print replicas are simply reusing the PDFs or images that they publish in print, sizing them down, adding some bells and whistles of videos and slideshows, and presenting them on the tablet. The publishers in my world are really trapped in their existing design-based print workflows. And so basically they kept the same workflow they had, but then when the magazine went to print, they took their PDFs and they added rich media and did some sizing for the tablet, and then they moved to the tablet edition. My conclusion is that that didn't work, but it certainly foretold the future for us. And as you probably know, magazine media companies are really pretty much in trouble now. Producing content in the way they've been doing it with the tool set they have is very costly. There's no end to the amount of sizes and form factors that they have to send their content to, and they've never come up with a good monetization model. The other thing that's had a huge impact on us 6 years after the iPad was launched and we decided to use print replicas is the emergence of mobile content consumption. Today's readers want to have only the content they want to read. They want to have it when they want it, on whatever device they want it. And in the magazine media world, we call this 360-degree publishing. Mobile, I think, will bring the end to these print-based digital pages, these page replicas. They don't size. You've probably had the experience of trying to read something that was intended for print on these small devices, and they simply don't work. So I'm hoping that in magazine media world, we're at a point where our workflows must change and we must do XML first. I'm going to skip this. But we are struggling now to come up with a schema that could easily be used by authors for authoring. You have to remember that in our world, authors don't know anything about HTML, XML, or structure, really. Authors, maybe more and more magazine media content is crowdsourced. Basically, a lot of the content is created now not by professional journalists, but by actually a lot of freelancers and just regular people providing content into the magazines. We can't use PAM and we can't use the Prism source vocabulary primarily because there's far too many metadata tags for the average SMO to use to create a magazine article, and there's far too many other tags in HTML5 for them to use, it's very problematic. Right now what we're working on is a Prism authoring schema. We're paring down the metadata, so only the critical metadata that an author would capture, not someone from the magazine would add later, to identify what magazine this article was created for, perhaps what issue. Very descriptive subject metadata is being required so that the content can be distributed in a personalized fashion or a subject-oriented fashion on mobile devices, and that's easy for an author to use. We've been basically working with Prism metadata and a pared down, a streamlined version of HTML5 tagging and doing usability tests with authors that know nothing about Prism or XML. One of our projects to test this has been done with a technology called ICTech. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's a plugin for Word, and it's, they have a patent on how they're actually using a Word interface to create XML, and they do a lot of government projects in the US. What we've been doing is using a form, a submission form kind of interface, so that they can, without knowing their tagging, fill in the blanks of the form, and out of that generate the metadata that's needed to flow into publisher systems and to distribute this content on tablets and mobile devices. The authoring looks very much like Word. Behind the scene, there is a document structure, but you'll notice the document structure is HTML5. For people that are XML structure people, it's kind of like anything can go anywhere, but the truth of the matter is that's how articles really are in our world. So it's kind of fingernails on the chalkboard, but it is a step forward just to capture that metadata and some of the document structures. So the current status is a number of projects are going on here, some with this MS Word interface, some with getting XML out of WordPress, which is where a lot of initial article content is actually captured. Important to us is embedding, if we can, the licensing terms so that the digital distribution, the digital distributors know I can publish this in the United States and in the UK, for example. But my right to distribute this ends tomorrow. So we need some basic licensing terms. That metadata is something that Prism Working Group is doing right now. The other thing in closing that I'd like to say is that AMP is having a huge impact on us, and I don't know if it's having an impact other places. It's the Accelerated Mobile Pages project that's on GitHub, and it turns out that for magazine media, not only is the quality of the content important, but it's how fast you can see it on your smartphone. And AMP is a subset. It includes a number of things, but we're particularly looking at the subset of HTML5 that'll let our magazine media content display quickly on a page. So hopefully this was a good introduction to you to a world apart, believe me, yet a very important part of the world of publishing, and the efforts that we've been making to have them embrace XML from the authoring stage on.
Thank you. We have time for one or two quick questions.
Yeah.
My question is that you told us that you are developing new vocabulary which will be able to capture metadata in some subset of HTML. How do you do package some, for example, media resources like images? Do you have some own packaging format, or are you using something existing like EPUB or?
So we've worked very close with the EPUB people, and in fact, both on the EPUB side and on the Dianne side, there are documents that show you how you could package the rich media from magazines and Prism media in as an EPUB. There's also a specification that Dianne developed back in the early 2000s for complex syndication called ICE, the Information and Content Exchange format, which provides the packaging mechanism for that. So there is work being done there, but right now we've been focusing primarily on the authoring and there. Yeah. Well, I'll let you call.
Go on, one more quick question.
Yeah, I am vaguely aware of something called repub.
Yes.
Can you comment on that?
So repub is a format that Google has been using to basically take the PDFs. It was for tablets primarily, and repub basically repub stands for republishing, and it's a format that let the publishers take their print-based PDF sorts of things and bring it into Google for display.
I actually meant pre-pub, not repub.
Oh.
My understanding it's something that you use in order to have all the resources you need to construct magazine articles.
And is it PRE?
Yeah, PRE pub.
I'm not familiar with that, but I will definitely look at that, and I know there are others like Facebook that have their article format. The problem is, of course, having one standard one would be important. But thank you very much, and I'll look into that.
I think that's one more quick question.
I noticed that you were saying, I work at the B&J, we have exactly this problem, we've addressed it in many ways. But the issue is about the artistic director's power over what happens and how things get done. Now, how has this implementation of mobile
are approaching that in different ways. In the U.S., Time Inc. Has a new CEO whose name is Joe Rip, and he has actually often said that he thinks it's the organization, and one of the things that Time Inc. has done is like thrown everything up in the air to break that organizational structure. Time Inc. is a member of ID Alliance, and in fact, a gentleman from Time Inc. is the current chair of the Prism Working Group. They just moved from up by Columbus Circle in New York. They moved their editorial and their production and IT offices from there down to the area of Manhattan by the World Trade Center. And interestingly enough, they separated production from IT. IT's in Brooklyn, and production is by the Freedom Tower in New York. And they got rid of all the offices. They have cubicles. He's doing everything he can to break that. I will say that I think the art directors have, they'll still be very powerful because of some of the print magazines. And that's particularly true for like high fashion magazines is what comes to me, because those are actually kind of a piece of art. But they are, I think, understanding that the high fashion magazine, that's why you buy the print. You'll never do a high fashion magazine really on a tablet, or certainly not on a smartphone. But that they have to adapt their workflows. Even Adobe Creative Suite in the US is like, everyone uses Adobe Creative Suite if you're with a major magazine. And they're even going to articles instead of issues, and they're moving towards HTML5 instead of, not instead of, but I guess hand in hand with the layout. So it's a huge, it's a cultural issue in magazine media for sure.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dianne.
Okay.
Cheers.